Hello everybody. This lecture was in the module for week 4, but we didn't discuss it in class. However, you will be accountable for this information. So I'm going to go ahead and discuss this lecture so that you can listen to it and maybe bring the text and the concepts to life for you so that the presentation isn't so flat. If at the end of this presentation you have any questions, please email me and let me know. But things should be pretty much self-explanatory. This lecture is a lot of terms regarding religion and family composition. So you may not be asked verbatim what these definitions are, but you would certainly need to understand the concepts so that you could pick them out in the context of an analysis question. So race, you need to understand, is different from ethnicity. And we talked about this a little bit, but I want to reiterate it again. Race is different from ethnicity because it's related to biology. So members from the same race share certain physical features like skin color and their hair texture, sometimes facial features. So, for example, people from African descent share some similar racial or biological features, such as the kinky or coily hair, the texture of the hair because it's coarse and the shaft is different. And the shape of the hair is composed differently from that of people from other cultures. The skin is darker because there is a gene that produces melanin, which is a protective factor. And that is because people from African descent are from a part of the world where it's very hot. And so the melanin helps to protect the body from sun damage. At the same time, that melanin can be problematic because it decreases absorption of the sun, which is needed for vitamin D. Hence, many people of color, especially Africans or people of African descent, are prone to vitamin D deficiency, even during the summer months. So there are biological reasons for this. Other biological variations or appearance things include the almond-shaped eyes of Asian people, the broad noses of African Americans. So these are just some examples. Ethnicity, on the other hand, is used to refer to race, but that's totally erroneous. Ethnicity is, it has to do with people sharing a common social and cultural heritage, and it's passed on from one generation to the next generation. So it really is more cultural, whereas race is related to biology, but it tends to have social, race also tends to have like a social connotation, right? So anybody who's brown, people will think like, oh, you're, I think we talked about this, like with people being black, just because you're black doesn't mean that you are African American, which is a race classification, right? So anybody who's has olive-colored skin, people will say, oh, they're Hispanic. Or people who maybe have olive or tan-colored skin and dark hair. People will say, oh, they're all Middle Eastern, or they're all Asian, when that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes people may be Palestinian, or maybe they're from Syria, they're Syrian, so they're from different ethnic groups. But we tend to lump folks according to race. So just remember that. Race is related to biology, and it's confused a lot with this social connotation. And ethnicity really refers to common social and cultural heritage that's been passed down. Okay, so bicultural is a term that's used to describe people across two cultures, their lifestyles and the sets of values. For instance, Sammy Davis Jr. was an African American, okay? However, he converted to Judaism. So culturally, he practiced Jewish laws, their religions, and supposedly adhered to, or I don't know how close he did, but adhered to other cultural values. I don't know if he kept kosher or anything. I highly doubt it. But just because he smoked and drank and did a lot of other crazy things. But, you know, he was known as a Jew, and he considered himself to be Jewish. So he's an example of someone who is bicultural. We could still have the same thing with people who might be Christian, and you know, they were raised in a Christian home, and but you know, the father is Jewish and the mother's Christian, and so they celebrate everything together: Christmas and Hanukkah and Easter and Passover. So these are other examples. Biracial is pretty straightforward. It's an individual who crosses two racial and cultural groups. So a person who is biracial, it doesn't mean that I'm black and because I like Hispanics that I could say I'm biracial. Remember, there's a biological component to race. So if I'm biracial, biologically, that means that one of my parents is from one race and one of my parents is from another race. So I might be Hispanic and black. I might be biracial in the sense that my dad is black and my mom is white, or my mom is Asian and my dad is white or black. So these are examples of individuals who are biracial. Other terms include the term minority. And I know I mentioned this to you before. When we're talking about minority in health, healthcare, social perspectives, it's not synonymous with numbers. So people can say, oh, you know, we need a majority vote, which means that, you know, we need, if there's 10 people in the room, we need 2/3 majority. So there has to be at least like, what is that, 9 or 7 people who vote yes. And, you know, if the other 3 vote no, then you have a majority vote and you can pass whatever you want to. That's not the same when we're talking about race and ethnicity and social constructs. Minority refers to a group that is underrepresented and has less social power. So let's take, for example, Newark, New Jersey. Newark, New Jersey is a majority-minority community, okay? So even though many of the citizens who live here are African American and Latino, they're still considered minority, okay? Because they are underrepresented and they have less social power, all right? So what does underrepresented mean? They're underrepresented in terms of, if you look at the state representation, if you look at county representation, if you look at, you know, national representation, there are fewer blacks who are in these, and Latinos who are in positions of power. Less social power. And, you know, we talked about that when we were discussing environmental health, right? So you may have a whole town that's filled with a minority population, but they have less social and political power because their voices aren't heard, and they can't make changes, valid and constructive changes that are going to benefit their citizens and sort of level the playing field in terms of health and other social outcomes. So that is what we mean by minority, okay? So if I show you a picture or a graph, and there may only be 20 Caucasians, and there are 30 Asians, and there are 60 African Americans, and I ask you, who is the minority group? It's going to be, the African Americans, all right? Not the Asians, because Asians are not considered underrepresented, and it's not going to be the Caucasians, because they're not considered underrepresented. So we don't consider them, it's not by numbers, okay? Stereotyping. Stereotyping is an assumption that we make about people in a similar culture or racial group. And these values, we assume that everyone in this group holds the same or similar values or beliefs. So this would be stereotyping. So perhaps someone encounters a Hispanic person, and they may have encountered or heard verbiage that basically said that all Hispanics are lazy, and they are looking to get social assistance, and none of them work. And so when you see any Hispanic person, you would have immediately these thoughts about them and these assumptions, when it's not really true, right? We can't say that about all people. Now, are there some lazy folks? There are lazy people in every religion, every race, every ethnic group, absolutely, but there are also hard-working people from every race, religion, and ethnic culture. So we can't stereotype. Okay, we can't stereotype. And the same thing goes with gender. It's not just race. It could be with gender. It could be with class. Everybody who's rich is always mean and poor and disrespectful at people who don't have much. And that's not true. There may be some people who behave this way, but there may be people who have monetary means who are very caring, very giving, very concerned about people who have less. So that's an example of stereotyping. Next, we're talking about family structures. So what are the different types of family structures that we have? Well, people can live in traditional nuclear families. They can be in nuclear dyads, extended families, or skip generation families. So what are some examples of this? Well, a traditional nuclear family would be one man and one woman of the same race and religion and around the same age, who are monogamous and raising their own children, okay? So monogamous, for those of you who may not know that term, it means that, monogamy, mono, that you have one partner, that they're not, in some open relationship. Does that happen? Yeah, it happens, but traditionally, when we think about the traditional nuclear family, we think about the mom, the dad, 2 kids and a picket fence, and nobody cheats on anybody, okay? And everybody's raising their own kids. There's no stepchildren involved. There's none of that. It's just this traditional nuclear family, all right? But, the world is different. And so we don't have only nuclear families. Actually, those are kind of rare. Well, I shouldn't say rare, but it's not the majority of the families that we see in this country anymore, okay? So what's a nuclear dyad? A nuclear dyad is one generation, and it's made up of a married couple without children. So people say, oh, you're not a family if you don't have kids. Well, that's not true. You can be a married couple and your husband and wife, and this is your family. But, in social terms, we would call them a nuclear dyad, okay? And extended family is a multi-generational situation. So there's the nuclear family of mom and dad and their own children, and then they may have extended birth relatives who are living with them. Usually we see situations where grandmom or granddad may be living with a nuclear family, or it might be a paternal aunt or uncle, or a maternal aunt or uncle, or one of the adults in the family. So this is an extended family. Okay. A skip generation family is one that has grandparents taking care of grandchildren. And we see this more and more. It's an increasing phenomenon. It kind of spiked. We saw this increase in skip generation families during the crack epidemic. And so with that came an explosion of HIV infection. And so what we had was a phenomenon of moms and dads who had children, and they were dying. They were dying from HIV infection. Well, die from infection, you die from AIDS. So, they had infection that went to AIDS, and then parents were dying. Or they were incarcerated. Parents might be incarcerated. Or maybe they're mentally incapacitated. So grandparents are raising their grandchildren. And we're starting to see more of this now with our new epidemic and onslaught of drugs with the opioid epidemic. So more parents, they may or may not be incarcerated, but they're just incapable of taking care of their children because of their addiction. So grandparents are stepping in. And then we also have a phenomenon called kindred care, which maybe the grandparents aren't alive, or maybe they're not able to take care of their children, but it could be an aunt or uncle or a cousin, or some other family member who's stepping in to raise these children. So here we're going to talk about some religious groups. I have asked you to please look in your textbook, pages 73 through 84. Geiger goes over religious groups, and some of this information will be included on the test. Okay, some of it we've talked about before, but just to give you an idea, information in those readings are fair game. So, one of the big things that you should know is that religious practices are rooted in culture, right? So these are our cultural phenomena, religion is. And each religious culture typically has some set of beliefs that define or govern their health beliefs and the way they utilize health care or not. So we have used in past, like the Jehovah's Witnesses, because they have some of the strongest beliefs as it relates to health, especially around the use of blood and blood products. So because of their religion and the way they interpret Scripture, they are likely to refuse surgical or medical interventions that are going to require them to have an autologous or homologous blood transfusion, meaning that they're not going to take blood that was donated by somebody else, and they don't want to take their own blood that has been taken out of their body, treated, and then stored. But there are some things that can be offered to them, such as using, we call them colloids and colloid replacement fluids. So they're just products, they're non-blood products that tend to give more volume. So, if you don't have enough blood in your body, then it causes your heart to pump and beat faster. It puts a lot of stress on the heart. You can go into shock, and then you could die. So during surgery, there's chances that people could bleed. Usually they do bleed. Some surgeries people bleed more than others. but there's a lot of things that we can do. So we can give these non-blood replacements, so colloids or colloid replacement fluids. We can use something called electrocautery. This is a little pen, and it gets super hot. It looks like a little soldering iron, and as they're cutting through blood vessels, they can sort of burn those vessels so that they don't bleed. We can also use hypothermia. So this is when we make the body really, really, really cold. And when we make the body cold, the heart slows down, it doesn't pump blood as fast, and it decreases the probability of high volume blood loss. So this slide goes over Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm not going to belabor this because we've already talked about a lot of it. So this slide again refers to Seventh-day Adventists. We've talked a lot about this religious group. However, one of the big takeaways that I want you to remember here is that because of their religious beliefs, the way they believe like certain foods should be eaten, they avoid a lot of types of seafood. And these seafoods tend to, any seafood really, tends to be rich in iodine. And we need iodine for what? Our thyroid. So if you have a diet that is deficient in iodine, you can have a lot of thyroid problems, especially like, you can develop goiter. So if you're caring for somebody and you know that they're Seventh-day Adventists and you know that they, they don't consume seafood, then it would be prudent for the nurse to ask about sources of iodine. So we do have salt that is fortified with iodine, and then we have iodine supplements. Seafoods also tend to be very rich in protein, and so a lot of these meats might be absent from your diet, and as a nurse, it would be important for you to be able to assess like what their dietary habits are, what their dietary deficiencies are, and be able to suggest to them how they can get these sources of nutrients into their diet. So there's a lot of plant-based proteins that people can have, like soy is a good way to get protein in your diet. Nuts are rich in protein. However, if people have an allergy to nuts and soy, then that's not going to work for them. So they may need protein supplements, and there are certainly supplements for protein and iodine that people can purchase at health food stores. The important thing to know that we would want them to be preservative free, because a lot of times they won't use vitamins, proteins, things like this with supplements, with other types of additives in them. And we shouldn't either. You want the pure form that you can possibly get. So there may be protein powders that people, plant-based protein powders or supplements that people can take. Some of it doesn't taste like anything. They can sprinkle it on their food, or it might be flavored. You can mix it with water or milk, or almond milk or rice milk, to increase the protein intake. So we talked about the religion of Islam, and those three. It's one of the three major monotheistic religions, and it's important to understand. Well, you don't have to fully understand, but do know that there are 5 tenets, there are 5 pillars, of the Islamic faith. And that's their declaration of faith, the fact that people pray 5 times a day facing to the east toward Mecca, and that there's Ramadan. And Ramadan is this fast that occurs over a 28-day period. It's not like a set time of the year, like Easter and Passover sort of move, anywhere between March and April. We usually have these observances. But Ramadan can occur It's based on like the lunar cycle, so it could occur at any season. So if you're working in a community that has a large Islamic population, or lots, or a large population of people who follow Islam, then you should know when Ramadan is. Because people will fast during the day hours, from sunup to sundown, and then at nighttime they will eat. And so, depending on the person's health, we can help them maintain this fast by, you might save their trays or save their food, or arrange for the kitchen to bring food to them during the night hours as opposed to during the day hours, because they will refuse food. But some people are very strict and they won't have any water or anything, but other people may have water. So it is permitted that for people who are sick, or women who are pregnant, and for small children, they can be excluded from fasting during Ramadan. And so people may not feel comfortable excusing themselves, and so in situations like this, we may need to contact a local imam, which is the religious leader, and the imam can give permission. And so most hospitals have a pastoral care division, and within the pastoral care division, or the department, are representatives from all faith cultures. So usually Christians, there may be there's usually a priest, and maybe a Baptist, or Pentecostal, or some other type of minister, and then a rabbi and an imam. Sometimes they're actually employed by the hospital, and so they work for the hospital. And other times, in some hospitals, they may be on call. So you may have one person in charge of the department, and then local faith leaders take turns being on call for certain religions. So, you just have to look at that and check that out when you go, or when you begin to work at your hospital. Another one of the pillars is giving alms to the poor, so feeding and providing for poor people. And then pilgrimage to Mecca or Hajj, where at least once in a lifetime a person is expected to go to Mecca and worship there. So do know that family is a very integral part of the Islamic culture. So and there's a lot of stereotypes about people who are Muslim. So you would want to recognize that, and the meaning of staying covered. It's not a matter of male domination or whatever, but to practice hijab is to cover the body as a sign of modesty. And so, people can be fully decked out with a miniskirt on under. Well, they probably wouldn't wear a miniskirt, but you know what I mean, like nice pants at the top. Underneath, they're fully black, hijab that they might wear. So some people do adhere to it, and some people don't. It's important to know that sex outside of marriage is highly discouraged, and young people are highly encouraged to maintain strong ties with people from the same sex, okay? But I'm going to tell you, kids are kids, right? So in most religions, sex outside of marriage is forbidden, but, it happens. So we shouldn't think that, because this person is Catholic, or because they are Muslim, or because they are Jewish, that these kids are not having sex outside of marriage, so they're not at risk, and we don't have to talk to them about these things. Every person should be educated on sexual health, whether they are sexually active or not. It's our responsibility as nurses when we have the opportunity to educate people. So if you're working in a GYN clinic, if you're working in an adolescent clinic, and this is part of the care, then it's incumbent upon us to deliver the information, and people can do what they want with it, but it's not up to us to decide what we will and won't tell people based on our assumptions of what they may or may not do. And on page 82, Geiger goes over some stereotypes about Muslims, and I don't need to go through all those, but you can check those out. So other ethnic groups that we should know about, well, American Indians or Native Americans, which is sometimes they're also called First Americans. They are the indigenous people of this country, of the United States. There are 500 Native American tribes that are recognized by the federal government. And most live on reservations. I think we've talked about that before. And because they live on these reservations, the reservations are fraught with poverty, deep, deep poverty. There's a lot of health inequities, and there's also a technology gap. So, these are things that I look at in terms of health promotion and chronic disease management. A lot of information is available on the internet. There's a lot of, there are a lot of health education programs that are available online. But if there's a technology gap and you don't have access to the internet, or you don't have access to, appropriate, meaning that, you can draw a bath and come back and your computer's still loading because it's so slow, the connections are so slow, using this type of technology is really not going to be meaningful for some people. The extended family in the Native American culture is extremely important, and grandparents or elders are considered the leaders in these communities. Native Americans are heavy users of traditional medicine. They also use traditional healers or shaman or medicine men. And it's important that we respect that. So even on reservations where there's a well-developed Indian health system, so they have clinics and dentists and all of, this Western medicine that we've sort of plopped down there, people will still insist on going to, the medicine person, man, usually it's a man, but sometimes it can be a woman, or a traditional healer for their issues. And so, there's nothing that's really bad with that, except, it's bad if a person's using it and they're not getting better. So we don't have to negate one for the other. So it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, but we can educate and help people and respect their use of traditional healers along with Western medicine if it's needed. So yes, I may want to drink these herbs and be in some sacred place to meditate to help my blood pressure go down, and that's okay. But for right now, we may need to encourage our patient to use this medication, to exercise, incorporate exercise, and modify their diet. With, look at their traditional foods and see what we can help them modify, increase their exercise, so that all of these things together can help bring the hypertension under control. And eventually, maybe they can come off of the medication, which is a main part of the Western medicine approach for hypertension management. So there is a way to blend traditions and cultures, and we're going to be talking more about that after the exam. But just know that American Indian, Native Americans and Alaskan Americans are heavy users of traditional medicine and healing. So, lastly, there are two related journal articles that go with this material. The first one is Spirituality and Medical Practices using the HOPE is an acronym, questions as a practical tool for spiritual assessment. So this particular article addresses how providers can, Okay, so this is the end of the presentation. The articles are all uploaded for you, so you don't have to root around to find them. Please check them out. If you have any questions after reviewing this, after reviewing your notes, after looking at the blueprint, feel free to ask me. But I think most questions can be answered in the frequently asked questions section, and there is a blueprint, and so you'll see percentage. So, about this many questions on a topic, which is 15% of the exam, which is 30% of the exam. It's not held to stone, but it gives you an idea of where to concentrate. So that was one of the things you guys asked for. So hopefully this will make studying a little bit better. Remember, you're not going to get through nursing school on an island. Try to find some folks that you can study with, compare notes, go over things. And again, if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to ask. And I will see you on the April